Thank you for having me. My name is Holland. I'm an alcoholic. I have a sobriety date. It's February 2nd, 2022. I have a sponsor who is a sponsor. I sponsor other people within the program. Um, I currently don't have a home group, but it's because I've gotten so busy in the YPA stuff, and my home group was on Fridays. So I'm currently homeless, but hopefully I won't stay homeless long. Don't follow my example on that. Get a commitment, get a regular meeting you go to. I want to thank you guys for having me. So I don't do well without like a topic being presented to me. So I kind of like wanted to like go ahead and lead with my topic. And like what I was going to talk about was basically like how a lot of my story is having to have a new experience within the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Also, if you guys hear my cats being crazy in the background, sometimes they just fight. They're not killing each other. That's just like how they get along. So hopefully that doesn't pop up. So my first time getting sober, I'm originally from a small island in Alaska, and I really loved Four Loko with caffeine, and I really loved mixing it with things that like didn't need to be mixed with Four Loko with caffeine. So a lot of my like drinking career was I was a child. Like I'll just leave it like that. I was a child. I was like in fourth, fifth grade when I like really started like drinking and enjoying alcohol in its many forms. And you know, as I've gotten older, like I never thought like the way I used was like insane because other Alaskan people like me like also love doing things like getting drunk and stealing boats from the Coast Guard or getting drunk and somehow ending up in like Canada, and we like would come to from a blackout in like a Tim Hortons and we're like, how did we get here? And I just thought that was normal. And then I moved to like the Midwest and people are like, no, we like didn't do that. And I was like, oh, well, like at me because it's really fun. Until it wasn't. And then I got sober when I was 17 after I'd spent a lovely little jaunt in prison. And when I initially first went to prison, I was like all for it because I grew up on this show called Oz. And anyone who's ever seen it knows it has like Christopher Maloney, who's hot, and like they do a bunch of like drugs and drink in prison. So like that was what I thought prison was like. So when they were like, you're gonna go there, I was like, bet. Like I'll get like a hot boyfriend. I'll like probably get to do some like drugs I've never gotten to try. Like I'm really into that. And my experience was not that. Like it wasn't like rough by any stretch of the imagination. I just got really good at spades. I know a lot about the NBA playoffs from 2010, and I've like read every James Patterson book from like 2010 previous. So after a couple of months of that, I was like bored, and rehab was an option because like I had been arrested like multiple times before this. Because like I just like really loved, so like we don't have like police where I'm from in Alaska. We have state troopers. If anyone's seen Alaska state troopers, they know that they're really fun to mess with. So like I loved like toying with the like officials of the law, and like I got busted a lot of times because of that. So my lawyer was like, you've been arrested multiple times, drugs and alcohol are usually like the like reason for it. Like, how do you feel about rehab? And I was like, okay, like I'm fine. Like that sounds cool. And they're like, you'll get to go to Seattle. And I was like, cool. I'm like into like going to Seattle. And I really enjoyed, I went to youth facility rehab, and like anyone who got sober, so this was in 2010. So anyone who got sober like back then as like a youth, like probably remember the days where like you got waitlisted for like 90 days to go to treatment because there were not that many. So like in hindsight, I'm super grateful for the opportunity that I was like one of the people who was like lucky enough to get a bed. And I was just like introduced to like a new way of life. And like my first 5 years of sobriety were fantastic. I did everything that they suggested that I do, and I had like a whole new experience, like what they talk about in the book. And then something happened to me in sobriety that like caused me to no longer believe in like my conception of a higher power. And what ended up happening was then I tried to do like Alcoholics Anonymous without like any type of spiritual foundation. because it wasn't like, you know, a lot of people talk about like how they hate like the Catholic God or like the church God. Like what pissed me off was like my God made me mad. My God let me down. Like my God that like I got to like make up was the one who let me down. So like there was no way I was doing this with him anymore. And what that looked like was I eventually went back out in the end of 2015, and then I got sober again shortly afterwards. I mean, I talk a lot about like I don't know if I would have ever drank again, like even somewhat normally, because like I got sober so young, and they talk about like how you're always like I was just drilled into my mind, you're always gonna pick up where you left off. So like I assumed that I just had to drink much worse than I did beforehand, because like that's what Alcoholics Anonymous told me. And like I'm grateful for it in hindsight, because like it definitely like led me back to the rooms a lot sooner. But what me coming back to the rooms looked like was, well, first of all, I like need to preface that I like moved to Iowa because I didn't know anything about like the Midwest, and I saw like a Facebook article that was like cost of living low, growing economy, Des Moines, Iowa. And I was like, yo, I'm moving to Iowa. And all my friends were like, why? So I did. And you know, the coolest thing about Iowa is you can buy liquor in gas stations, which like you cannot do that on the West Coast. So like the fact that I could get like whiskey and like 6 hot dogs like at the same time was like pretty lit. I was like into that idea. But like it didn't last long, and I like realized like I knew in my heart I was like supposed to be in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So what ended up happening was like a 6 year stint where like I tried to continue doing Alcoholics Anonymous, one without any type of like higher power, and two, like trying to recreate the magic that I experienced the first time. So I wanted to like the very first time I ever worked the steps, it was like the best I've ever felt like since the first time I had like experienced the phenomenon of like what alcohol could do for me. So I was like constantly trying to like recreate that, and that just doesn't work. That like just doesn't, like for me it just didn't work. And like I was a tirade, like a feral raccoon in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I was armed with like facts, knowledge, and I knew anything about the book. Like I know a lot about the traditions, I know a lot about the concepts. I've been involved with HACYPAA like for a really long time at that point. So like I understood like service structure as well. And instead of like being helpful with my knowledge, I like weaponized my knowledge. And I was just like a terrible sober person. And like not even a sober person, I was like a terrible person who just like didn't drink. And what eventually ended up happening was like I became a shell of a person inside the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's a pretty awful place to be. Like it's pretty awful when like you hate being inside the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but like you know you have to be here. And like to be completely honest, like I don't tell this like very often, but like really the only reason why I never tried killing myself is I have this terrible fear that like I would try it and I would mess it up and I'd be like in a like vegetable state, but I would still be like conscious and I could hear, and people I hated would bring me meetings all the time. And I would like be stuck in a hospital bed, like hooked up to machines, like being able to hear that these people I hated were bringing me meetings every day. And I wouldn't be able to tell them to just like go away. So like that was enough for me to like never try to actually like end it that way. So what ended up happening was I drank one more time in February of 2022 after like a year of sobriety, which is like the least amount of time I had ever had. Like during that 6 year cycle, like I would get like 3 years and drank, 2 years and drank. And then this last time I like drank after like a year, and it just happened like that. Like someone offered me something and I realized I had no spiritual defense. Like it was just like, that sounds like a great idea. I love the idea of getting drunk and eating breakfast burritos and crying to In Her Shoes. I'm about that. So I like decided I wanted to like try something new. And I knew some like there was this place in Minnesota called The Retreat. It's a really awesome like 12-step based treatment center, non-clinical. So it's like great for someone who like kind of needs like a spiritual boot camp. If anyone has any questions about that, you can ask me after the meeting. I do a lot with them and I really, really support their structure. So I decided to go to like Minnesota and like have a new experience. And I would love to say like walked into treatment like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and like I was going to be like really give it like an honest effort. And that was not the case. I hated being in treatment. I hated being in treatment as an adult. I hated all those dudes in there who like had 3 days sober, who is like their ninth time in treatment, and they were like, "This is what you got to do when you get out of here to be successful." I'm like, we're all like newsflash, like we're all losers who like can't do this sober thing. So like, I'm not giving anyone advice. Like I like clearly don't know what works outside of here. So like I hated the next rehab star that like wanted to be like the ultimate like pick me in rehab, and they like did everything like right, and they're like, I like get up at 6 a.m. and like meditate every morning, and I pray, and I like lead these like small groups, like the cult inside the cult. I hated it. I was like not for it, and I like hated all the guys whose wives hated them, so the phone was like always ringing, and like they would get into all these fights. So like I used to like just unplug the phones, and then they'd be like, my wife hadn't called in like 3 days, and like none of the like staff ever checks the phones. So yeah, I was a terror, like a nightmare. But I was open to the idea of doing Alcoholics Anonymous differently, thanks to the idea that like someone, one of the workers there, like I was talking to him about how I was like struggling with my conception of God. And he was like, what makes you think that like your God hasn't changed and grown? You haven't like really gotten to talk to him in like what, 6 years? And I was like, yo, maybe we try something new. And that's like basically what my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous has been this time, is that like I don't know anything. And I'm like always open to the idea that like I could be wrong, things could change, things could grow. And the best thing is like I quit trying to like put my God in a box. So like, because the more I like tried to define who I thought like my God was the less I was able to be helped by like my higher power. So like I like really embrace this idea of like an infinite God, which is like so helpful for like someone like me who like I have to believe like I'm like a pretty smart human being, if I say so myself. So like I really have to like believe in the witchcraft of like Alcoholics Anonymous and like the spirituality aspect. Otherwise, I can think myself right out of the rooms, and I've like proven that time and time again. So like I really buy into like, there's like the star witches. I'm like an AA witch. Like I love like the whole like when like my sponsors are like, I just like don't know if it works. I'm like, it does. Like I don't know how to explain it. I can't explain the magic of spirituality, because like the fact of the matter is I can't. But the biggest thing that I would like say is so important about like my recovery now is like I stay in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what that means to me is like I'm very involved in like my current like service structure is like HACYPAA. Minnesota's like really on fire right now, which is like super cool. So like I'm an advisory member for the Mini PAW, which is like our Minnesota State Conference. And then I'm on the interim host for the International Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's going to be in Minnesota next year, which is like not really on my bingo card. I wasn't like really banking on having to do that much work. Um, and I'm the outreach chair for HACYPAA, which is the Heartland area conference of young people in Alcoholics Anonymous. So Minnesota's hosting 3 conferences, a state, a regional, and the international next year, which is like a very cool opportunity that like God has presented for us. And like I just don't say no to service. Like I don't want to ever be that person that like forgets that like these things got me here. So my life is never going to be too big for Alcoholics Anonymous. And when people like, if I wasn't meant to do these things, then like they wouldn't be presented to me. Like if God didn't think I could handle it, then he just wouldn't put it in my lap. It's like what I truly believe. But like that doesn't like I can't stay sober just off of like service alone. So like I meet with my sponsor regularly once a week. We never miss it, and like we never stop. Like I'm not one of those people that like I have a therapist for a reason. So like my sponsor is my guide to Alcoholics Anonymous, and we do Alcoholics Anonymous. We started off with like going through the book together, then we did the traditions, concepts of world service, traditions in a relationship. Right now we're going through a sister program book so we can have like more tools to be able to like help the newcomer. And since I'm not currently in the book with my sponsor, I do a weekly big book study with another one of my good friends from Wisconsin, who like she knows the book inside and out. Because I need to stay in the middle. Like I need to continue, like just because my sponsor doesn't have me on something inside Alcoholics Anonymous exactly doesn't mean I can't like seek other like outside help to like, or other help within the rooms to continue to do these things. So like I do a really intensive big book study. So basically I like, I wouldn't say two sponsors because like I love my friend, but like she's not allowed to like really do what my sponsor does. Because then like if she was my sponsor, I couldn't like talk shit with her. And like that's like my second favorite thing to do. People in Alcoholics Anonymous do a lot of bad things that is like kind of fun to gossip about. So I like don't want to get rid of that completely. And I like continue to like give back in the sense of like whatever like intergroup needs or like our district needs. I'm a treatment and corrections like officer for the area that we're in. So I mean, these are like all things that like, you know, if I could, I wouldn't do it. Like Holland himself doesn't want to be that busy. Holland himself wants to like watch his cats. Like literally, like my cat the other day was just watching the rain, and I was like, I could watch my cat watch the rain for hours. But like unfortunately I had to do some like Alcoholics Anonymous stuff. But like that's like what my life, like what I would like to do. And the other thing like I really talk about is like I get a lot of like really cool opportunities to like speak at like other conferences, or like I get to go back to that treatment center that I went to and like share, like talk about what it's like to be a member of Anonymous and not just like go to Alcoholics Anonymous. So like if I'm like given the opportunity to talk this much about like step work, recovery and all that, I do step work regularly. I am like one of those people that like I am a firm believer that like I was given these tools for a reason, so I'm going to consistently use them. I do like my regular 11 step like checklist at night, like my prayer and meditation, you know, page 86 in the book. If you haven't read it, like go check it out. It's a great thing to like retire at night and like do. And I tell them to my cats, you know, I tell my cats like, was I resentful today? Like, hell yeah. I was like mad at my boss because like he existed. And like I think I don't like let up on that kind of stuff. I'm a regular inventory person too, because like I am a firm believer of like my perception of reality is always wrong. And I'm not like one of those people that like treats inventory where I'm looking for like my part. I treat my fourth column as like, how do I move because I have this? So like if I have a resentment, how do I move because I have this resentment? Because like sometimes I have a resentment that like my boss being an asshole, like literally doesn't have anything to do with me because like sometimes he's just an asshole. And I don't have a part in that. But like, how do I move because he's an asshole? Like, how do I give in to this resentment? Or if I have a fear, like I have a fear of like, oh my God, what am I afraid of? I have a fear of men. That's like an easy one. Men kind of like consistently kind of scare me. Because they just like do some like real gutter buddy shit. Um, how do I move because I like have this fear and like I need to constantly like be aware of that kind of stuff. And like I do a regular 6 and 7, and like what 6 and 7 like looks like for me personally is that like I ask God to take, I like recognize that I have some character defects, but I don't know what all of them are. Like, I don't know what all of them are all the time because like I'm just not that self-aware as much as I would like love to be. I just like don't know what like all the things that are like wrong with me, or like what prevents me from being helpful to the newcomer all the time, or like helpful in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I just ask God to take all of me, good and bad, and I don't dictate what's good and what's bad because I just don't really know the difference. And like my experience with that is like some things that I really liked about myself have been removed. And like that's when like the bargaining comes in. Like, do I want to like take that back, or do I trust that you remove this from a reason that I just don't quite need to understand? Um, so sometimes that's like really sucks. Like he's gotten rid of some things that like I really was good at like getting people to do things for me. I had like great learned helplessness, and for some reason he removed that, and I've become like really self-sufficient, which like mm, sometimes I'm like I'm lazy at heart, so like I don't really like want to do all these things on my own, but like God told me it's not good just to like use men for the sake of using men. So like that's like one of the things that like I really stress with like people I work with is that we continue to have like an open idea of like a new experience, and that we continue to like be in the middle, and we're in the middle on all sides of the triangle. Like you don't get to like I don't get to like be in the middle on the right side of the triangle because then I'm just in the middle on the right side of the line. Like being in the middle means I do all these things on like a regular basis. And sometimes I do a lot of them really, really well. And sometimes I do like 6 of them okay. But 6 is better than nothing. So like as long as you're doing something that like is touching each part, I think like you're really winning. So thank you for having me. And with that, I will pass.